Mike Briggs is our cattle market analyst this week. The beef industry received some potentially promising news last week when China announced it would move to lift its ban on U.S. beef. We'll have more on that in a few minutes. The international market was a bright spot in July. American beef and veal exports were 8% higher than July 2015. For the domestic consumer, the cost of ground beef averaged $3.66 per pound in August, down 3 cents from July and the cheapest since February 2014. We last spoke with Mike in late July. We talked with him again Wednesday morning and started by asking about the drop in prices markets had experienced over the previous few days.
Pretty disappointing. Kind of thought we had our low put in there, started a nice little rally, and it just rolled over on us. I think it's primarily just too much supply of cattle right now, and not only cattle, but they're big cattle, so we're putting a lot of pounds of beef on the market, and so are our other protein competitors. I mean, there's just a tsunami of pork, and it's almost free in the store, so that's really hard for us to compete with right now.
What causes the bottom here in cattle?
What causes it? I wish I knew. I think it's got to be the big puke of the big cattle. I sold the pen today. It's my last pen of cattle I'm going to have to sell to the end of October. Now, what I don't know is if I'm representative of everybody else. On the conference call this morning with the Nebraska cattlemen, some guys were like me and some guys weren't. But I still think the numbers are trending lower, and that's going to help us out. But the packer has done a tremendous job all year long of managing his inventories of live cattle and not over harvesting himself. So he's been able to keep cattle in front of himself, and that keeps prices depressed.
Why are they allowed to do that in terms of how are they so able to do it?
Because we've got way too much captive supply. Guys turning cattle into them on the high of the week, or 50 cents over the high of the week, or whatever. Guys that don't want to do the work, they're just turning the cattle over to them. So they've got all these cattle that they know are coming every week that they don't have to do anything about. And they know, hey, I got 55, 65, 75% some week of my inventory covered. I only have to buy 25. And if I don't pay very much for those, I get these even cheaper, so let's roll. And they just keep beating us to death with them.
That there's going to be more meat going forward in all the competing meats, as you mentioned. Does that mean that the cattle industry has to narrow down here and try and find a more reasonable number?
I think absolutely, and on that, one of my biggest fears going forward, this may not happen until next May, June, July, but I saw statistics where right now we're at 97% of our packing capacity. So once we have this big calf crop come, when those cattle are ready to go to market, we are going to overrun our packing capacity, and I think that could be a bloodbath of all bloodbaths, because if you've got cattle and you can't get them gone, it's just going to be horrific. So that's a little bit longer term thing, but what I think is going to happen, absolutely expansion has got to stop. And really, I read this the other day and I thought, this is really right. We're not really expanding, we're just restocking. We'll never get back to the levels we were, and we don't need to because cattle are so large now. But I know that the restocking is going to stop. The one interesting thing, and I don't know what the effect of it is because we have to wait till January to get an inventory report. You've seen cow slaughter stay high all year long. So you don't have that guy keeping that cow trying to get one more calf out of her. If she's old, if she's nasty, she's going. And so that's good. We still haven't seen this big stream of heifers come back to the feed yard. So maybe there's still a little bit of retention there. But as long as we're not growing the cow herd, that's going to help us. But we've got to expand demand. That's the only choice we have. You've got to have exports, and exports have been better, and I think will continue to get better.
One more point on supply before demand. So you mentioned a good point there in that the cattle have been bigger. Now, the last report said that Nebraska was starting to narrow those down. Actually, the last few have showed that Nebraska might be starting to put some lighter cattle out, but long term, is it going to be heavy cattle exiting the feedlot?
It's a great question. For there not to be, there's going to have to be a penalty imposed by the packer. If they don't want 1,500 and 1,600 pound cattle, there's going to have to be a dock. And there is presently, provided you sell on a grid, or if a packer rolls in and says, hey, your cattle are too big, I'm going to dock them. But the packer's the one that's going to have to ratchet that down. I would think there would be some pressure from restaurant trade because they don't want these great big cuts of meat. So eventually that's what's going to do it, is there's going to be a penalty for making them too big, because right now with corn as cheap as it is, we're just going to keep putting pounds on because that's what the math says to do.
So demand, grilling season's over, now what?
Well, luckily, finally, and I went to the store today just for this reason, you finally start to see meat prices come down. Now the thing that's just totally interesting to me, and it's all from propaganda from whatever, you've seen the 80-20 hamburger is now down under $3, finally. But the 93% lean stuff, it's still up at $5 because people are willing to pay for it because they think it's healthier. Whatever, guys. It's amazing that they've been able to maintain their margins. So the retail margins on lean ground beef is just, they're huge. But for the rest of us, you've seen that stuff finally come down. That's still the #1 seller is hamburger. So now I think that comes back into a lot of people's diets where maybe it wasn't in there. But then I got to talk out the other side of my mouth, and that the tsunami of pork I talked about, you know, that's still, our competing meat proteins are way cheap right now, and I don't know what we do about that.
Curious to know if there's any talk in the industry about the thought of China maybe allowing U.S. beef to come in.
Oh, there's talk about that. You know, you always want a green shoot to see when it looks like this. Green shoots of, you know, maybe change, and I think that'll be fine. But anybody that thinks that's going to be immediate, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen that fast. But it'll happen, and it'll happen in other countries too as time goes along, and that'll be the savior. But you got to get there. So this immediate situation of the glut of big cattle, we got to get rid of that. We got to clean it out and get our inventories more under control.